right, everybody. I hope you guys are doing very, very well on this fine Sunday afternoon, November 17th, 2024. Wanted to take a little bit and talk about the prosecution of Chloe Driver. This is, let me change my screen here. We are going to be looking at the testimony of Chloe's psychiatrist, McClendon Garrett, Dr. McClendon Garrett. And Dr. Garrett is a forensic psychologist. She is not the treating psychologist for Chloe. She did the evaluation, and now she is giving comment on ability to stand trial and aid in her own defense and such. So I thought this was such an interesting bit of testimony for a number of different reasons. One that really, she has been found competent to stand trial. So Dr. Garrett did identify her as competent to stand trial. By the time that she came in contact with Chloe, Chloe was no longer in the midst of a psychotic event or episode, if you will. And I think she was being medicated at the time. So she gradually came back around. Now, Dr. Garrett did see her in a number of different episodes, one of which she was well groomed and seemed to be stable, in a good mood and such. And then that deteriorated over time, and she began demonstrating the common positive symptoms as well as negative symptoms of a psychotic event. She also has a long history of mood symptoms. And so she was a bit vague as she sort of talked about schizoaffective disorder versus schizophrenia versus schizophreniform diagnoses. And some of that may be because of the changes between the DSM-4 diagnostic criterion, the conceptualization of schizoaffective disorder, and then the DSM-5 conceptualization. So it's no longer a diagnosis given per episode. You now are required to give a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder. You're basically looking at two episodes, one where the mood symptoms are not featured and the other where the mood symptoms are featured. Yes, I can go into this long discussion about why the powers that be wanted to sort of manipulate this diagnostic determination. It's an academic research type of issue. There are other diagnoses that they would prefer that we use. Bipolar is a mood disorder, primarily mood disorder, with particular symptoms. You can certainly have psychotic episodes. You can also have major depressive disorder with psychotic features. So it becomes very not confusing. It becomes a bit redundant, vague, poorly defined variable. When someone is presenting with a mood disorder along with symptoms of psychosis, and that particular array of experiences and symptoms is actually really, really rare. The DSM-4 says schizoaffective disorder occurring in less than 3% of the cases. New research has come out to show 1%, and that settles in somewhere around 0.5 to 0.8% of these diagnoses. But again, you lose the descriptive. See, I didn't want to go into all this. You lose the descriptive value if you're not able to parse out and discern the difference between bipolar psychosis versus major depressive disorder with psychotic features versus schizoaffective disorder versus schizophrenia. So take it from me, a lot of this academic rigor, a lot of this academic argument is for the benefit of research. And in some cases, I suppose, yes, it's true that it could make a little bit of a difference in medications, though not frontline medications. So all of that being said, Chloe also has an early history of trauma. It is a picture of complex trauma in that she has early trauma that is then repeated. It becomes rather systematic throughout her childhood into her teen years, finally settling in with a man who is 30 years her senior level. He's 30 years older than her, and he is highly manipulative, apparently. He is highly manipulative and has some very odd ideas about people and what they should be doing and health. And he has some very troubling, or at least one very troubling friend who I think is probably a scary guy. So altogether, this picture for Chloe is so tragic and sad and horrible. And I think that we would be short-sighted if we didn't fully appreciate what this young woman was dealing with. Now, clearly, the young trauma systematically repeated, the old man that she ends up, the exposure to drugs. And it does seem that Jason Spillers was providing to her not just CBD, but also THC. And meaning he was giving her a tincture that he said was just a CBD oil, right? Which was just a certain type of cannabinoid that would not be considered an intoxicant. Her experience, though, according to what she told Dr. Garrett, her experience taking this tincture that was from Jason Spillers, she was certain that it had THC in it. She was certain that she was taking an intoxicant of some kind. And by all accounts, her symptoms, her experience, the psychosis, the mood disruption, all of that was dramatically increased as she began taking this tincture that was provided by one of Jason Spiller's friends. For some reason, he did not, or Z did not want her taking a commercial CBD oil, which is just crazy, right? So there's no telling really what they were giving her. It almost sounds like maybe there was a hallucinogenic in it. Now, marijuana, THC, is notorious for diagnostics for one of the schizophrenic psychosis, one of the psychotic type of diagnoses. So I think it is so interesting that this Jason Spillers, he's at the heart of giving her this tincture that was exacerbating her symptoms. To me, there needs to be some serious investigation into this guy. This stinks to high heaven, in my opinion.
In this case, you did the competency evaluation. You found her to be competent to stand trial, ultimately, right? That's not an issue that you're talking about today.
That's correct.
Yeah. When you did that competency evaluation, how long did you spend with her when you conducted that initial interview?
About an hour and 45 minutes.
Okay.
Actually, sorry, at that time it was 2 hours and 35 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to make sure we were correct. That was in August of 2022. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that was 2 hours and 35 minutes at the Cherokee County Detention Center with Ms. Driver.
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall in that report, do you have the competency report with you as well?
I do.
I think this is the same for both evaluations, but you listed sources of information that you had in that evaluation. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
And you listed several things, including Ms. Driver's, some records from Ms. Driver at the jail, hospital, medical records from her at the jail, correct?
That's correct.
Reviewed her Wellstar Kennestone Hospital records as well.
I did.
Specifically some handwritten notes that she had made during the course of that stay at the hospital. Is that fair?
That's correct.
You said you had the indictment, a summary report from the City of Canton Police regarding their investigation. And you had a evaluation that had been conducted by a privately retained expert, in this case, Dr. Roberta Ballard, too. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And you had the opportunity, I presume, to review all of those things before you went and saw Ms. Driver?
Some things I reviewed before and some things I reviewed after.
Okay.
Like to get her jail records, I had to get her to sign a release of information. So I got that information after.
Okay. So when you went and met with her in August, she signed a release form for you to obtain the records from the jail.
That's correct.
And you reviewed those after your evaluation.
But before I read the report.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Did you ever reach out to myself or Ms. Trethewey to obtain any additional information that you would need for your evaluation of Ms. Driver on either incident?
I don't recall reaching out to counsel.
Okay. So tell me specifically, when you meet with Ms. Driver, how do you go about discussing these issues with her? I assume there's some sort of rapport you're trying to establish with her so she can be honest with you. Is that fair?
There's sort of we'll call it sort of a forensic rapport.
Okay.
There's, we're not overly friendly, but we're obviously, accepting and empathetic. We always start with an advisement of what their rights are. We let them know that it's not confidential. We let them know that they do not have to answer our questions, that they have the right to consult with their attorney, and that anything that they tell us can be included in a report, and we might have to come to court and testify, and that the information can be used at sentencing.
And Ms. Driver had already been through an evaluation with a privately retained psychologist that you were aware of, right?
That's my understanding.
So did she express to you that she understood what this process was going to be like?
She did.
Okay. She didn't have any issues communicating with you about any of the questions you were asking her?
She did not.
So are there any specific types of tests that you do while you're conducting this evaluation, or is it really just talking to her about her experience?
Sometimes there's testing done. I did not do any testing in this case. I spoke with her. I did a clinical interview. I did a competency interview. And then when I went back, I did a criminal responsibility interview.
Would the testing be done more if you believe that there were cognitive issues with Ms. Driver?
If there's cognitive issues, if there's specific concerns that they might be feigning or exaggerating symptoms, if there's comprehension issues, yeah.
Okay. You did not have any concerns about any of those issues as it related to Ms. Driver?
I did not.
Okay. So when you,
and I don't mind saying, this is no, this is no criticism. It's just, for me, a personal preference. I think if there's any question at all of potential litigation or testimony, oaths, and, I feel better with that data in my hand. Because you have data using a well-normed instrument that is then well researched. And so in essence, it's not simply you on the stand making your assumptions, your determinations, but you're backed by an awful lot of research. And that feels solid for making a decision about someone that you could be affecting the rest of their life. So please don't misunderstand me, not criticizing, not by a long shot. I think that she saw this woman, met with her, saw clearly the level, the extent of her mental illness, and was very certain about what she was looking at. So I'm not saying anything against Dr. Garrett. I think Dr. Garrett was awesome, and she's a forensic psychologist. I'm just, different people have different, I guess, different approaches for how they handle some of these situations.
You talked to her. Do you recall what the first
Hi, Angelique.
set of topics were about this particular case with Ms. Driver?
About the case or about just in first topic covered in the interview?
Your interview.
Background information.
Okay. And what did you learn about Ms. Driver's background?
I learned that she had sort of an unstable early childhood, that her family moved around and she felt like they were kind of cold, but that she also left the family several times. She left and moved in with boys. She even left the state and moved in with a boy. She had some suicidal ideation.
None of this is unusual for someone who experiences early trauma, perhaps sexual abuse within the family. These things are not uncommon. Sexual victimization for a young teen or even earlier very often will act out in just dating behaviors, high level of promiscuity, things like that. So that none of this is unusual for what Chloe was exposed to in her childhood.
Early on, some self-injurious behavior. I'm talking about like cutting. She would cut her arms. She, I think, attempted an overdose on sleeping pills. She also abused substances. She started at a young age using marijuana and then.
The other thing about this, the cutting is very common for this type of scenario that she grew up within. And then the using intoxicants at an early age. Again, we'll very often see that with kids as young as 10, 11, 12 years old. And if the child is communicating about their experiences, they'll often say that the groomer was the person that introduced them to intoxicants. And then after they got a taste for it, then they just kept wanting more. So a lot of people are kind of shocked and they're like, wow, what's a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old doing, smoking weed or drinking or whatever? Sometimes it's introduced by the groomer as a part of the process. It's always a warning signal to me to see a younger kid hanging out with older peers. Not that there's sexual abuse involved there, but maybe they see those older peers as a path to the substance they want.
Cocaine and experimenting with some other drugs as well.
Did you ask her if she had ever been evaluated or diagnosed as a teenager or earlier on in her childhood?
She stated that when she was younger, she did get some treatment. She saw a doctor. She wasn't sure if it was like her pediatrician or a psychiatrist, but that she did see a doctor who prescribed her some antidepressants early on, but she did not take them.
Okay. And you're not aware of any records or evaluation reports that you've ever seen about her?
I've not seen any documentation of that.
Okay. And after discussing her background, what would your next topic of discussion generally be with an evaluation?
In the competency evaluation, the next step would be to talk to her. Well, in both of them, the next step would be to talk to her about her current mental status, how she was doing at the time of the interview.
Okay. So let's skip off the competency evaluation piece. Let's just focus on the criminal responsibility.
So we would do that, the mental status in both evaluations.
Okay. Was there when do you recall doing the second interview with her regarding the criminal responsibility piece?
It was about a month later in September of 2022.
And was there a difference in Ms. Driver's personality when she met with you both in August and September?
In August, she was upbeat. She described herself as being excited. She talked about not really sleeping and having a lot of projects she was working on in the jail. She said she was annoying her roommates by singing and dancing and doing gymnastics.
That sounds like mania to me, right? Almost like a textbook description of a pleasant manic experience. Or
So she was really very upbeat the first time I spoke to her. When I returned a month later, she showed signs that she had been crying before she came into the meeting. She was disheveled. Her hair wasn't done. Her jail clothing was disheveled, and she expressed sadness and feelings of worthlessness and hopelessness.
Are those symptoms, are those signs of things that you saw from her just in her personality to you? Are they things that you would pick up on in the nature of your evaluation of her?
That's pretty much the purpose of the mental status exam, is to look for things like that, because they can show sadness and feelings of hopelessness, feelings of worthlessness, feelings of being persecuted, sleeping too much or sleeping too little, changes in appetite, changes in activity level, change in the rate at which people speak, the rate at which they move. All of that can be suggestive of a depressed state, of being in an episode of depression. And then the other end, the being excited, not sleeping at all, having a lot of projects, really being in, like, a lot of people really love being that way because they get things done. They have a lot of things that they can do, and they have a lot of energy, and they don't feel like they need to sleep. So they'll stay up for days on end without getting any sleep. And that would be a sign of mania or hypomania, which is sort of a subclinical level of mania.
Okay.
And mania the catalyst for mania is high levels of dopamine.
Part of the sources that you were reviewing in this case, including her records from the jail, is that fair?
Yes.
And those records included evidence regarding medication that she was taking?
That's correct.
Can you describe the medication that she was on while she was in the jail at that point in time? Or even from when she came into the jail until you met with her?
So they actually changed her medications a lot. They tried different things, and she frequently said she didn't want to be taking any medications at all, and she would refuse the medication. So the medications were adjusted and changed and moved around a lot. When she first came in, she was taking medications to address mood. She was taking medications to address anxiety, and she was taking medications to address symptoms of psychosis, like hearing things, seeing things that aren't really there, disorganized thoughts, things like that.
Can you describe specifically the medication that she was on? Do you recall?
Can I refer to my notes?
Absolutely, yes.
Came in, she was exhibiting signs of depressed mood, hopelessness, suicidal ideation, and labile affect, which is how you present your mood, the outward expressions of emotion, and labile means that it moves up and down. So she had shifting moods, shifting emotions. So they were looking at a possible unspecified psychosis according to the records. So she was prescribed Prozac, which is an antidepressant, Visceral, which is actually an antihistamine, but it's given for anxiety, and Zyprexa, which is an antipsychotic.
And that is, you said that was when she first initially was in the jail. Were those symptoms that she was being observed with in the jail, were they consistent with the, I guess, diagnosis or impressions that the medical staff at Kennestone had of her when she was at the hospital?
So my medical records, I believe, from Kennestone were incomplete.
Okay.
I only had about 118 pages from Kennestone Hospital, and there was only one psychiatric report in that file that I had.
Okay.
And at the time of that evaluation, she was sedated and did not get any information.
Because she was on a ventilator.
So I didn't really have any information about her mental health from the hospital. So
Okay.
I started from the jail.
And so from the initial arrival at the jail and the description you just gave of her mood and her conditions that she was showing, how did that change over the course of the next months while she was incarcerated?
She continued to express a lot of paranoid ideation, thinking people out to get her, out to harm her, talking about her behind her back. She also expressed a lot of what we call delusions of reference, which is when you see something that's sort of innocuous and you interpret it as having some special meaning to you. So a lot of people will say, oh, I was getting a message from the TV or the radio, like it was talking directly to me. Not that I was hearing what they were saying, but there was something underlying it, a coded message that was just for them. Other people will think that they're getting instructions from people's facial expressions, body language, objects, and things like that. So she was describing getting a lot of coded messages from sounds she heard, things that facial expressions of people in the jail, that she was doing something wrong, that she shouldn't be there, things like that.
Those records, those reports that you're referencing, those are things that she was telling you about in the course of your evaluation too, is that right?
Those are things she told to the jail staff, that the jail staff documented in their records, and she also told me very similar things.
Okay. And in conducting your evaluation, that is one of the things that you are trying to look at in terms of the consistency of what she is telling, not just yourself, but other people that she's interacting with. Is that fair?
Yes, consistency, and especially if if it's detailed. So you look at, if somebody's something really vague and then it changes, that is something that we are concerned that they might be making it up because they can't remember more detailed things to share over time. So that's very vague. And if they do try to use something that's detailed, then the details might change over time. So we look for both of those things.
Okay. And for an example, you noted this in your report that she said to you that people are communicating with me through their body language and I'm not supposed to be here. Is that one of the things you recall her saying to you directly?
Yes, she said that in terms of how she was feeling in the jail, but she also said that she had felt those things before as well.
Okay. Before the incident date?
That's correct.
Okay. Did she talk to you about how long she had been feeling those paranoias, those concerns about how she was seeing and hearing things?
She told me that that actually started a long time ago when she was a teenager, and that she was feeling sort of a more generalized paranoia. She didn't give me details about what kind of thoughts she had as a teenager in terms of the paranoia. She also talked about having sort of magical thinking, which is when it's sort of the opposite of delusions of reference. So magical thinking is when you think that there's something about you that can control the world, even though there's no real connection. So she talked about being able to read minds and things like that and having a spiritual awakening. And that occurred prior to when she met her husband.
So this is an important diagnostic point. Not that we're diagnosing anyone, but just to point out why Dr. Garrett is commenting on this. These beliefs that she can control people with her mind, or she can read the future. Certain people's certain body language is like a special sign or symbol to her to communicate information. That these are things that are later revealed were taught by Z and Jason Spiller, some of their beliefs that they had. However, Dr. Garrett is letting us know, and this is for the purposes of a determination of mental illness, that she was already experiencing magical thinking, ideas of reference, feelings of persecution. She's already experiencing those symptoms of psychosis before ever meeting these two creepy dudes, right? So it is true that people that are prodromal schizophrenia, or perhaps they're having these episodic thought disorder symptoms dependent on bipolar or depression or whatever, that those people that already have the thought disorder, they are more susceptible to the manipulations of these narcissistic, charismatic type cult leaders. They kind of get the cult leaders. I mean, it's not just cults. People that have a need to control others, your basic narcissistic nightmare, their radars are up looking for people exactly like Chloe. They want that person that they can mold and manipulate into a loyal subject. And the reason they become a loyal subject is because they look at this narcissistic leader or this religious leader and they say, well, this is a godlike figure. And then they won't question that person. They'll do whatever horrible, evil thing is in that person's mind. So not strange at all, not out of line, not unbelievable that, number one, she gets involved as a young woman. She gets involved with someone 30 years older than her, consistent with the complex trauma that she experienced in childhood. Also consistent that she's already having schizophreniform type of experiences. And that left her open to the influences of Creepy Z. That's a good nickname for him, Creepy Z.
But while she was using illicit substances as a teenager. And then she went off illicit substances, and I don't know whether she continued to experience delusions in between going off and when this occurred, but she said that the symptoms became particularly bad approximately 2 to 3 months before the alleged crime.
And why?
Okay. Another important point is that in today's world, they are growing medicinal grade marijuana where the levels of THC, the levels of intoxicants are really high, beyond what just a general like garden grower might grow their own plants. It's a different quality what they're selling commercially, right? You also have to question whether Jason or his creepy supplier, were they adding some hallucinogens? You just don't know when you're buying from, someone off the street. You just don't know what you're actually getting. So it is very common in today's world now with the medicinal grade marijuana being grown. It is common to have people brought into the emergency room who are experiencing a psychotic episode brought on by the marijuana that they're smoking or tincture that was made, that kind of thing. It's so powerful. And so again, she says that she has these psychotic episodes earlier in her life, but she also was a drug user and she did use marijuana. So were her dopamine levels already fairly high, and using the homegrown marijuana, that was enough to sort of send her over the edge into these hallucinations and delusions and such? Hard to know. However, I think it's incredibly important that we have multiple people already that have said, once Jason Spillers began to give her the homemade tincture that he got from a friend because he denied her using commercial grade product. Now, if she had been using commercial grade product, at least you would have known that it was safe, because it is processed according to standards that are set by law. And you would say, well, there's not going to be any fentanyl in here, or there's not going to be any meth. So the fact that Jason said, no, we're not using commercial marijuana, which would have been the safer route, he used this from a buddy. And she said it definitely freaked her out. Her symptoms got dramatically worse when she started using Jason's tincture. And Jason himself said, and I assume Z will, that when he started giving it to her, she got noticeably worse. So he claimed there was not THC in it. He claimed he was told that it was only CBD, but it was homemade in someone's kitchen. So you don't know who's telling the truth.
How was that?
Months before the alleged crime.
And why was that?
I think there's sort of a confluence of events. I think she started to feel worse. She suggested that she was starting to sort of question some of the things that she was being taught, and started to feel a little bit paranoid, and was starting to experience those delusions of references. She was starting to see things and making them think that she needed to hurt herself, that she wasn't supposed to be in the universe, she wasn't supposed to be in the world.
And they were exposing her. I can't even overstate this, y'all. So it's so important. They were exposing her to a modified sensory deprivation environment while she is having psychotic symptoms, while she is in a mood disorder episode. That's powerful. That is so powerful. And I was struck by watching this young woman as she's sitting there beside two attorneys. She's watching Jason Spillers testify, and the more he talks, she gets smaller and smaller in her chair until at one point she actually had her feet up in the chair with her. Her knees were between her torso and the witness stand. It was like she was trying to like get behind a barrier or to pull back away from him. That is so telling. I mean, alarm bells, red flags peeling madly about this Jason Spillers guy. His involvement, the timing for her symptoms, her experiences, and then ultimately the savage murder of the baby, Hannah. Something is really wrong here, in my opinion.
And that she reached out to her family, the family she was living with, and wasn't able to get help and was instead given CBD oil. And that once she started taking the CBD oil, that there was a big jump. She felt like it was very potent. That's how she felt. And that her paranoia and delusions of reference and magical thinking all increased sort of significantly and sharply after starting to take that drug.
Okay. Now, I'm going to kind of get to the CBD specifically. One of the things that you diagnosed her with was cannabis use disorder. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And is that based on the CBD that she was taking?
Yes, she believed it had THC. Now I have no idea what was in the cannabis oil she was taking.
Right.
But she believed that it was intoxicating, and she continued to take it, and it was causing her significant distress.
Did she explain to you that the CBD that she was using was being given to her by the husband in her life, Mr. Ben Michael?
She did. She indicated that she had ordered some online, but that Mr. Ben Michael, I've been calling Mr. Joyce, so I'll try and whatever is most consistent.
We've got 3 different names.
Yeah, so it's hard to keep up. But she said that he did not want her to use the commercial one, so he brought her one that was produced by a friend or brought to him by a friend. She didn't really know the source.
Okay. So what she was using was one that had been, what she told you she'd been using was one that had been provided by a third party, not the stuff that she ordered.
Correct.
Okay.
Isn't that, what do you guys think of that? That you wouldn't want to take a commercial product that is being grown and produced under controlled circumstances, guidelines of safety and health for the packagers. What, and especially I'd like to know Calm in the Chaos's opinion, what would be the reasoning for Creepy Z and Creepy Jason? Why do you think they would restrict the access of a commercial product where you've got safety, right? You know that you're not getting fentanyl or a hallucinogenic or some other type of chemical. Why would they be so adamant to use their special little blend of CBD? Oh, here you go, little girl. This won't hurt you at all. And yet, as they gave this to her, her symptoms of psychosis, the confusion that she was experiencing, the disruption in cognition just became more and more and more pronounced, right? Well, I wondered about that, Calm in the Chaos. So my first thought went to a sinister place. I thought, well, they know that there's something extra added in this. They've put some kind of hallucinogenic in, and then they provide suggestion to her what she's seeing or what she's experiencing. And then that ends up her looking at them in a more mystical way that they predicted or they knew her experience. So I thought about that. The other part of me, though, then got to another part that thought, well, is this somehow their, were they doing an experiment? Were they attempting altered, like a modified MK Ultra experience? Because you've got to remember, not only were they giving her these massive drugs, she's much younger than them, 30-something years younger than them, massive drugs, complex trauma, and they're putting her in modified sensory deprivation environment. They're using the shame and humiliation of drinking urine. It's almost like these two assholes, professional term there, it's almost like they were trying in their own weird, demented way, like they were like running their own kind of experimental MK Ultra program, like they were following those points of brainwashing and manipulate and suggestive manipulation. It's pretty horrible. The whole thing is horrible, and I'm really left in confusion, because on the one hand, I look at this and I say, okay, she was clearly experiencing suicidal ideation. And we all know, as mental health providers, there's a very fine line between suicide ideation and homicidal ideation. Okay. It's very, very similar in nature. If she were being abused, if perhaps her baby was being abused, she might even be able to reach a point believing that she is saving her child by ending the life of the child, right? So she might actually get to that point of, I have to get out of this. My baby has to get out of this. I can't keep allowing them to do this to my child. We cannot continue in this environment. I've asked my parents for help. They're non-responsive. I've gone to mental health professionals. They were non-responsive. There's no help. I don't have any contact with anybody. They were severely, this is something that really hasn't come out very well, I think. They were severely limiting her contact with outside people. She really was in an abused situation. This was really a nightmare, truly. And I know that narcissistic asshole Jason Spillers, I know he got up on the stand and he tried to normalize the whole experience, but please, oh, they're girls. All they want to do is run on the beach and smile. And it's so beautiful the way they talk about their feelings. It's so cute. It's like, shut the hell up. You are dehumanizing these three women. You're taking their humanity from them and almost like turning them into children. In his mind, he was looking at them like they were simpletons, children who were incapable of caring for themselves. It's a really disturbing set of circumstances. My hope is that we hear from, of course, Z, but my hope is also that we end up hearing from the other two wives, as well as the parents of Chloe, to hear about her younger years. I think that this was just, I think they got to go after Z and Jason. I think she was in an organized, systematic program of abuse, and they were trying to somehow manipulate her thoughts and change her. And I think she was left abandoned, ended up absolutely hopeless. The SI sets in. She does reach out to her previous abusers. Her parents had been her abusers, but she reached out to them for help, reached out to some healthcare providers, and no one would respond. No one would help her. It's the damnedest thing. At the very least, wouldn't you think, even if it's somebody you didn't like, let's say you got a cousin or somebody that you just don't like them, they live a life that you're not happy about, things like that, but they show up one night at your house, or they call you on the phone and they say, I'm in so much trouble, I'm so confused, they're mistreating me, I'm scared for my baby, please help us. Even then, even someone you weren't particularly close to, wouldn't you at the very least feel a moral imperative to at least try to take the baby, to try to help, to make sure that the baby is in a safe place? So it's so odd that her own parents made no move to offer anything. I mean, at least drive her to a women's and child shelter, right? Take her to the emergency room. it's so strange that nobody would help this young woman. It's just so tragic and horrible. And so we also, you just can't negate, you can't forget the shame, humiliation ritual with the urine and the modified sensory deprivation environment. There was something dark and horrible and sinister that was happening. And that then leads us up to this moment of, I guess, evil when this baby is killed. How do you get past that? Because your first inclination is to say she absolutely killed her child. She's guilty, period. Are there no avenues? Are there no avenues of consideration for the influences of Jason and Z? Because I think it matters. In this situation, I think it matters. When you have lay people, you have people that just convince themselves that they're smarter than the average bear, and they read some wacky off-the-wall accounts of MK Ultra and mind control and brainwashing bullshit, and they decide to carry out their own little experiments in real life. Do we not hold them responsible? Do we not make that somehow criminally, perhaps negligent? Giving her these drugs to treat psychosis, doesn't that make him providing medicine without the appropriate license? I mean, there's so much wrong here. There's so much wrong. And I do believe, after listening to Dr. Garrett, I do think that, she's competent to stand trial. She's obviously clearly not psychotic right now. But you're going to have a hard time convincing me that she knew what she was doing, that she understood that the end of life was end and final, never to awaken again at the moment that she killed this baby. Number one, because of the drugs that were being provided to her in these modified environments that were so damaging. And number two, because she seemed to have some belief that there wouldn't be finality, that it was just an answer to the problem. It was just the suicide, the homicide was a path of escape, a path of egress, right? That's not exactly the same thing as saying that you want to end their life forever. So it is just disturbing. I mean, Grammy, this is a nightmare. This is evil incarnate. It is so dark and sinister what this young woman went through. And she very likely was already schizophrenic, right? The timing of her symptoms would be consistent with the development of schizophrenia. It was all the diagnostic picture was clouded by the complex trauma, the early drug use, the repeated sexual exposure. And then right during that period of time when full schizophrenia would have been expressed, she gets wrapped up with this bozo who's 30 years older than her and is putting these crazy magical bullshit thoughts into her mind. Who knows what this young woman thought? Who knows what she thought was real or not real? It is as tragic and awful as any case I literally have ever heard of. To me, this goes right up there with Lori Vallow. This is insanity. Not Chloe Driver's thought disorder or mental illness. The insanity of Jason Spillers and Z, and the insane treatments, the exposures that they put this young woman through, and we don't even know what they were doing with the child. It's just awful. It's terrible.
Um, is it fair, Dr. Garrett, that the use of substances, illicit substances specifically, can influence or increase someone's paranoia and delusions?
Yes. And even illicit and even legal drugs can do that. Anything that has sort of an intoxicating effect can negatively impact somebody's symptoms. So if you have, and cannabis is sort of well known for being something that causes people who don't have mental illness to have some level of paranoia. And so the addition of cannabis to somebody who has a pre-existing paranoia can increase, it can sort of ratchet that up and make that worse.
And your belief that the symptoms that she was reflecting to you in her earlier years or teenage years, were those caused by her mental health situation, or were those caused more by drug use?
It's difficult to say.
Okay.
It was a long time ago. So self-report is not hugely reliable for things that happened that long ago. But the way it usually works is either a substance can trigger an underlying mental health condition, can cause a new mental health condition, or can be a way of trying to medicate a condition that already exists. Exactly. So those are the most common ways that we see, early mental health and substance use interact.
And she left out the fourth option, which is that the drugs are introduced at an early age by a groomer, and the person then develops a taste for the effects, and either because they have mental illness or they just enjoy the escape of the effects of the drug. Okay, so I told myself I was going to be very controlled, and I was going to limit this video to an hour. So we're almost there, 51 minutes. This is actually a really good transition point. I covered all the points that I wanted to cover. And this couple of videos that I'm going to do, again, is a focus on mental illness as compared to not guilty by reason of insanity. I think it is true that this young woman does have a severe mental illness, and which of the garden variety schizophreniform diagnoses or schizophrenia, however you want to look at it, it is clear that she was experiencing severe symptoms before meeting Creepy Z. In the months before the murder of the baby, the symptoms increased, and it coincided with drug use, sensory deprivation environments, shame rituals. And then even after the death of the baby, when she's in jail, she continues to experience thought disorder, mood disruption. So she definitely has severe mental illness. The question is does that coincide with not guilty by reason of insanity? And what are those standards there? And that is where we will pick up the next video. All right. So I hope you guys have a wonderful Sunday afternoon, and I will return. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. Talk to you later. Oh, if you hadn't hit the subscribe button, I hope you will. Please hit the thumbs up so that others can find the video. And if you would like to share this video on your social media, I would appreciate it. All right. Talk to you later. Bye.